I appreciate Dan's firsthand experience with the Walmart Corporation. I'd like to add just a couple of observations to that. I'm always inclined to agree with Ambrose Bierce that patience is a mild form of fear disguised as a virtue. So if I have the opportunity to go through one of the checkout lines that's just automatic, where I can just do it myself and get it done as fast as possible, I've been inclined to use those. But the more we use self-service lines, and even the more often that we use ATM machines, the more hours are taken away from the employees of the grocery stores, of Walmart, and of banks. And it's something that I'm trying to remind myself of, to take a couple more minutes, stand in line, and allow someone to earn a living rather than just going to the machine. So it's just a thought. It has never been my goal to be partisan. When we first started this church, just 3 months, we started our first service 3 months before the election in 2008. And at that time, we actually had several leaders of the Greene County Democratic Party who were very active in our small congregation. And I celebrated the election of our nation's first black president with as much enthusiasm as anybody else that was at the watch party that night. And I've been a huge fan of Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill, even though it hasn't always been reciprocated. Prior, though, to that time, I had regularly been contacted by officials in the Democratic Party trying to recruit me to run for various elected offices. Because for a generation, I'd been writing opinion columns in the Springfield News Leader that had been taking our elected officials to task, not just for local issues about poverty housing and payday loan industry, but also about illegal wars, cuts to education and poverty programs, environmental degradation, and for misogynistic and homophobic federal policies. However, once we had a very prominent Democrat in the White House and locally in the Senate, and I began to be critical of them for illegal wars, undermining education and poverty programs, for failing to defend the environment, and for tacitly, if not directly, supporting misogynistic and homophobic policies, I stopped hearing from the Democratic Party. And many of those Democratic loyalist members of our church left, and left so angry that I can still clear several tables of a coffee shop where liberals typically gather just by showing up. I'm not a party loyalist. I am an equal opportunity offender. Missouri's favorite son, President Harry Truman, was often called "Give 'em Hell Harry." But Truman objected to that. He said, "I never really gave them hell. I just told the truth, and they thought it was hell." As spiritual people, we are not interested in whether Democrats or Republicans are in power or whether you go to Walmart or Target. What we're interested in is justice. What we're interested in is the truth. We're not necessarily interested in one corporation over another or one political party over another. It's no great secret that the Democratic Party tends to be more often in favor of social justice issues, and so you will more often hear me being critical of Republican policies than of Democratic policies. But if we're really devoted to the truth, we're going to be just as critical of Democratic elected officials as we are of Republican officials when they are just as guilty. And I think it's fair to say in 2014 that the two-party system is failing us to the degree that both parties are really corporate parties. But what I found the most interesting historically about Harry Truman, and simultaneously the most disappointing, is that things that he was saying 70 years ago as he was running for re-election are still so very current that you could take one of Harry Truman's election speeches and just change a couple of words and deliver them again today. This is a longer quote than I'll typically use in the pulpit on a Sunday morning, But if you'll indulge me for just a moment to share a piece of one of Truman's campaign speeches, and he uses the word Republican Party, but I'm going to translate that to politician, because I don't think it's fair to libel one and imply that the other is innocent. So I'm just going to change that part of his speech from Republican Party to politician or elected official. He said, "Well, I've been studying politicians for over 12 years at close hand in the capital of the United States, and by this time I have discovered where the politicians stand on all the major issues. Since they won't tell you themselves, I'm going to tell you. They approve of the American farmer, but they are willing to help him go broke. They stand foursquare for the American home, just not for housing. They are strong for labor, but they are stronger for restricting laborers' rights. They favor a minimum wage, and the smaller the minimum, the better. They endorse educational opportunity for all, but won't spend any money on teachers or schools. They think modern medical care and hospitals are fine for people who can afford them. They approve of Social Security benefits so much that they took them away from almost 1 million people. They believe in international trade so much that they crippled our reciprocal trade program and killed our international wheat agreement. They favor the admission of displaced persons, but only within shameful racial and religious limitations. They consider electric power a great blessing, but only when the private power companies get their profit rake off. They say the TVA was a wonderful idea, and we ought to never try anything like that again. They condemn cruelly high prices, but fight to the death every effort to bring them down. They think that the American standard of living is a fine thing, so long as it doesn't spread to all Americans. And they admire the government of the United States so much that they would like to buy it. Now, if the President of the United States could state the hypocritical nature of the economic divide so clearly, and he could state it in a democracy where the masses are the victims of this economic equality, and yet they can vote. The masses can vote to change the nature of the government. Why is it that nothing has changed? I'm not saying there's been no progress, but you have to admit this speech that Harry Truman delivered 66 years ago fits. The shoe still fits our current day. John Maynard Keynes, of Keynesian economics, succinctly described the problem this way. He said, "Capitalism is the astounding belief that the most wicked of men will do the most wicked things for the greatest good of everyone." It's difficult to motivate people to work, to innovate, to invent, or even to deny themselves any immediate personal gratification if there's not some promise of reward. The American dream involves there is the potential for success, for reward. Capitalism holds out the promise that if you will work hard, if you will delay gratification, if you will save, that you will reap a wonderful reward of economic security, if not personal wealth, or comfort, if not luxury. If you just work and save, invest in your pension, obey the laws, and do what's right. The problem is that when the American dream becomes American wishful thinking, when hard work, delaying gratification, and saving doesn't actually allow you to retire with dignity or have access to health care or to ever own your own home, then the promise of capitalism becomes a lie. With the right rules in place, capitalism, with its rewards-inspired invention, innovation, and hard work, it can produce and has produced the strongest middle class in the history of the world. But when we vilify teachers and policemen and auto workers, all labor union members, for insisting on earning a living wage and a pension that lets a person be able to eventually buy some Bermuda shorts and black knee socks and sandals and wear them in a retirement home in Florida where they can criticize the government full time, then capitalism is no longer a gift. It's a lie, and it's a curse. The late Jewish Croatian economist Branko Horvat stated, "It is now well known that capitalist development leads to the concentration of capital, employment, and power. It is somewhat less known that it leads to the almost complete destruction of economic freedom." Every one of you who ever played the board game Monopoly as a child has a basic understanding of what Horvat was talking about. That the longer you play, the more you roll the dice and keep moving your piece through the capitalist system on a Monopoly board, wealth gets accumulated in the hands of one player. And once one player has all the wealth, the game is over. Everyone else has lost. Now, it is possible to change the rules so that all the players have a chance to get back into the game. The rules that keep one player from acquiring all of the land, all of the utilities, and all of the infrastructure. Now, in honest truth, our nation has been through several ups and downs of this roller coaster over the last 2 centuries. We will let capitalism run wild, and wealth gets accumulated in the hands of a few people. And there has to be some kind of redistributive approach to wealth. And unfortunately, more often than not, that has been through warfare. I have to believe that we are smart enough to do it without a cataclysmic war. In our earliest days, Thomas Jefferson, who was, of course, one of the architects of our economic system and our national government, said before the Constitution was written, "I hope we shall crush in its birth the aristocracy of our moneyed corporations, which dare already to challenge our government to a trial of strength and bid defiance to the laws of our country." 240 years ago. 240 years ago. Afraid that corporations could evade the laws of the nation in such a way to benefit themselves at the loss of everybody else. Thomas Jefferson did not know the word inversion, but we'll talk about that. The most wicked of men will not, of their own accord, do what is right for the poor. They will not, of their own, do what is right for laborers. It was not natural market forces that brought slavery to an end. It was not this magical, invisible hand of the marketplace that ended child labor. It was not competition in the marketplace that made the workplaces more safe, that gave us the modern invention of the weekend or the 40-hour work week or paid vacations or sick leave. It was labor unions, organized labor, working in conjunction, at least at that time, with spiritual leaders and visionary politicians. My first pastor was fired from my home church for organizing a labor union in a sewing factory. So if you wonder where I get this, it's in the genes. Literally, they were sewing jeans at the sewing factory. When things in the American economy go a little bit too well for a little bit too long, unions become weak. And along with them goes the churches. When the economy is too hot, churches become irrelevant, and politicians realize that they must be sold to the highest bidder. Franklin Roosevelt, who had to rally Americans to respond to fascism and Nazism and communism and nationalism, also took the time and energy to warn the Congress of the United States that their constant practice of caving in to corporate power threatened to bring American freedom to an end. He said on April 29, 1938, "The liberty of a democracy is not safe if the people tolerate the growth of private power to a point where it becomes stronger than the democratic state itself. That, in its essence, is fascism. Ownership of a government by an individual, by a group, or by any other controlling private power. That's fascism. And when you have corporations and their lobbyists writing the legislation that Congress passes so that congressmen vote on legislation that they've never even read, it has been written by the corporations for the benefit of the corporations and passed without substantive review on the floor of the Congress, that, men and women, is fascism. I am currently perplexed by the involvement of someone who has seemed to be an advocate for a more fair tax system, Warren Buffett, in the proposed move of Burger King's headquarters to Canada in order to avoid paying corporate taxes in the USA. And I have the benefit of actually knowing a friend of Warren Buffett's, and I contacted her this week to talk about this and have her explain to me how a person that I've looked up to, trusted and believed in, can be involved in this inversion movement. And I got to tell you, what I got was not an answer. What I got was corporate doublespeak. And it comes out of this notion that if it's good for the corporation, and corporations are people after all, that it is above being questioned. The media, in concert with corporations, has given this process the benign name of inversion. This is a word that we wouldn't have used for corporations a year ago, but now the word is inversion, because inversion sounds so much nicer than bank robbery, which is what it is. For there to be a functioning democracy where the people who go to Walmart or the people who go to Burger King and buy Whoppers and fries, there also has to be paved roads. There has to be water and electric lines. There have to be police and firemen. There have to be schools and hospitals and airports. Corporations that love to harvest the fertile fields of the American economy, but they don't want to pay their fair share in the taxes that makes America possible, are like pouring salt into the fields. If they don't want to plow the fields and plant, then there's nothing for them to harvest. When Walgreens wanted to jump through the tax loophole that we call inversion, an angry public pointed out that the majority of the income of Walgreens, which is now on every corner in the United States, the majority of their profit comes directly from pharmaceutical sales that are funded by the federal government, that they are being supported by taxpayers, but they wanted to avoid paying taxes. They realized that that obvious lack of patriotism was going to cost them a lot of customers. And even though they did back down and they decided to stay here, the fact that they wanted to take their money to Ireland has made me personally drive past Walgreens in search of another option several times in the last 2 weeks, and I frankly don't see that changing anytime soon. For all the screaming corporations do about American taxes, the larger companies have already influenced the writing of the tax codes to get their effective rate down to nearly 0%. I pay more taxes than General Electric, the entire corporation. I personally do. They have written the tax codes for their own benefit. You don't think there's any lobbyists representing the people at Burger King that flip hamburgers and fry French fries. There's no lobbyists influencing the writing of the tax code representing their interests. The corporations are protesting a horrible tax structure that they wrote for themselves. They are the ones that have had access to the seats of power to create this tax system. One of our longtime listeners is an American expat living in Scotland, and Robin recently wrote to me to ask, who is it that yells amen at the end of all your sermons? She went so far as to say, this is a little insulting, but she said, Roger, your sermons often leave me very depressed, but I listen all the way to the end because I want to hear that amen, because that makes me feel good. That gives me hope. I never get tired of telling people about my friend Mel Miller, who has spent his life fighting for social and economic justice fighting against racism, warfare, and prejudice. But I told Robin, I said, Mel's 90 years old now. He's not getting around as well as she used to. And she immediately panicked. And she said, what will happen when you lose that voice? And Mel's looking pretty good. You look handsome today, Mel. Mel's not looking like his amen time is anywhere near the end. But she's speculating on the other side of the pond that if he's 90, what happens when Mel's not here to yell amen? And I had to stop and think about that myself. What will happen here when Mel's not here to yell amen? And my gut feeling, this is an existential thing, I can't prove it, my gut feeling is that everybody here will yell it for him in his honor. Mel has spent a lot of his life as a lone wolf, calling for school integration, housing for the poor, justice for American Indians, and support for poor farmers. I got to tell you, like Mel, I felt a lot like a lone wolf here in southern Missouri, performing weddings for same-sex couples, fighting corporate profits, hospitals, and churches that abuse the vulnerable and the poor. But if it was just me bloviating about progressive religion and Mel shouting amen when I'm done, then we're a pretty silly pair of preachers. Corporations have as their mission statement that they're going to pay a dividend to their stockholders. That's why they exist. That's what they're trying to do. Politicians have as their unstated mission to be reelected by any means necessary. So what stands between the corporations and the government and all of the people that work at Burger King and Walmart, the people who are too poor to have a lobbyist, who never will have a politician come courting their donations? Who stands between power and them? Folks, it's you and it's me. Just you and just me. We are the prophets now. We are Isaiah. We are Moses and Jeremiah and Amos. We are the ones who will demand that workers will be paid a living wage, that they will be able to retire with dignity. We're the ones that will insist that the laborers who build houses eventually get to own one. We're the ones who will defend the immigrant farmer, the child growing up in urban blight and in underfunded schools. We are the ones who will prevent our economically disadvantaged young men and women from simply being recruited like they were mice to put them in uniform and send them away to fight wars for oil profit and military spending. How can we defend justice against the combined power of corporations and government? I think you defend justice the same way you defend a lion. You let it out of the cage. You take it back into the street. You talk about it. You shout about it. You don't give up. And you shout amen until you're too hoarse to say it again. Old King Pharaoh, let my people go. And Burger King, if you don't love the people who eat your nasty food enough to help pay for their schools, health care, and housing, then you can go, but you won't be taking any more of my dollars with you. And Walgreens, if you want to give advice to seniors about which Medicare prescription benefit they should choose to benefit you the most, all right. But I'm going to advise those seniors to take their prescriptions to a locally owned pharmacy who will not try to rob this nation of its future. It's not that teacher and police pensions are threatening the nation's economy. There are no teachers with offshore accounts and apartments in Paris. Business owners may cry out against the minimum wage being raised to something just slightly better than poverty or better than slavery. But look, if everyone in here went to an Ivy League college and got a PhD, somebody would still have to nail shingles into the roof and make pizzas and milk cows. And at some point, we have to acknowledge that the people who make life possible are people who also deserve to live and to live with dignity. What I know for sure is that the corporations and the government will never get this right unless you tell them, and you tell them over and over again, and you tell them loudly enough and often enough that they can't pretend that they can't hear you. Well, I guess that's what I've got to say. What do you have to say?
You have been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at Rev. Dr. Ray at AOL.com for more information.